Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour, tout le monde. Okay, so we'll get started. I think there's still some people filing in, but that's okay. So my name is Nick Janius. I'm part of the Advanced Technology and Innovation Group here at CAE. So I'm excited to welcome you to the latest installment of the On Track series as part of the Engineering Tech Career Track. A few months ago, while browsing one of my favorite technology sites, I ran across a book review that had a super intriguing title, and it was called The Right Kind of Crazy. It was about a NASA, written by a NASA rocket scientist, a real rocket scientist. It told the story of the Curiosity rover that landed on Mars in 2012. A lot of you maybe don't remember it. I do, because it actually left a lasting impression on me because of the different innovative landing system that was used for that specific mission. And what I was curious about is how, among all the different approaches that they could use, they picked this one, because it was so strange. So we're going to hear a little bit about that today. So I bought the book to find out, but the book had a few surprises in it, and what I also learned is about the challenges of teamwork and leadership and innovation, things that Adam experienced at NASA, but that drew a lot of parallels here at CAE, and I suspect that many other organizations. So that's, I think, a good reason to have Adam over today. So Adam Steltzner, who's here with us today, wrote The Right Kind of Crazy. He's a team leader and chief engineer for the entry, descent, and landing at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratories, 25 years as of this year. He's an award-winning scientist with a PhD in engineering physics. And if we're lucky, he might even tell us why he stopped being a rock star and turning into a rocket scientist. So hopefully you'll find Adam's story as interesting and exciting as I did, as he talks about the power of curiosity, fostering a culture of collaboration and innovation that uses the right kind of crazy to achieve the impossible. So please welcome Adam Steltzner.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning. Thank you, Nick. This is Mars. It's a video that some friends of mine and I made of the surface of Mars, actually. It was a very difficult video to make. It is, it's taken by a camera. Actually, we just really held the camera. The camera is built by the Malin Space Systems in San Diego, California. And that camera is strapped to the world's largest extraterrestrial rover. It's hanging under the world's largest supersonic parachute, about 2.5 miles above the sky of Mars. I want to share with you the journey of making that video, essentially, about landing on Mars, about the development of the landing system, and lessons I learned about teamwork, leadership, working on problems where innovation is critical, and the power of human curiosity, all of our innate human curiosities, to motivate and also to overcome obstacles. But this journey of innovation and development is a personal one, and as is leadership. And so my personal story doesn't start at Mars or at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It actually starts here. This image is of the San Francisco Bay Area from the Marin Headland near the city of Sausalito. This image is taken about 1 mile from where I grew up, the house in which I grew up. And it's apropos because, although it may be difficult to see, in the upper left of that image, you can see the constellation of Orion hanging over the San Francisco Bay. I was a young, listless, wannabe rock star playing gigs in the San Francisco Bay Area in my 20s. And one night, returning home from a show, I noticed that that constellation, Orion, was in a different place in the night sky than it had been when I drove out to the show. Now, I had not been a very good student. In high school, I really had not studied hard at all. I missed, in fact, that whole Earth spinning on its axis thing. And I was baffled as to why these stars, I didn't even know it was the constellation of Orion, but it's just a big, bright, boxy constellation. And it had been over the East Bay when I drove out, and it was over the West when I was coming home. And I got curious. And I allowed myself to follow my curiosity down to the local community college, a junior college, to take a course in astronomy to teach me why the stars were moving. That course had a prerequisite of a physics course. I thought physics, not a chance. But it was conceptual physics, called physics without math. And I thought, all right, that might work. So I took that class. The joke was on me, actually. The astronomy course got canceled because it didn't have enough people sign up for it. So there I was in this physics course, and it changed my life. That spark of curiosity about the night sky ignited a fire of exploration in my life about the universe, about learning about it, and would result in a PhD in engineering physics and landing stuff on Mars. If old Adam were to have been told what Adam of today's job was, his head would have exploded. But thank God we never really know where our curiosity will take us. Now let's talk about Mars. For eons, Mars has captivated our attention. Before we had aids to our vision, we looked up at the night sky and we saw a light that was a little fuzzier, bigger, redder than the other lights in the celestial sphere. When we got aids to our vision, when we got the first telescopes, we looked up and we saw life. We saw civilization. We saw roadways and canals. And then we got better telescopes. And we realized that those are just really natural features present. But we never really lost that notion that maybe Mars was alive. And that's understandable, because it's a profound question to ask. Are we alone? Are we alone in our universe? Are we alone in our solar system? Could one of our nearest neighbors harbor some form of life? We first went to the surface of Mars to try and answer that question in 1976 with the Viking missions. These were fixed, three-legged milk stool landers, and they had an arm, as shown here, that would reach out, scoop up soil, and do the best test we knew in the 70s for life. Literally shove the soil into a petri dish and see if anything would grow. It was kind of the good old days of space exploration. We were in the space race with the Soviet Union. And I actually can't tell you how much money the U.S. spent on Viking, because we didn't bother to keep track. I mean, seriously, those are the good old days. If you back calculate, we think it's somewhere in the $5 to $10 billion. That's a lot of dollars. And with an ambiguous result and a $5 to $10 billion investment, it would be 20 years before we would make it back to the surface of Mars. It wouldn't be until we started putting rovers on Mars, here's a family portrait of the rovers on Mars, that things would really take off for our understanding of the planet and whether it might have at one point been alive. So starting from the left here, in 1997, 21 years after we put Viking on the surface, we put the little Sojourner rover from the Mars Pathfinder mission, about the size of a microwave oven. We put that on the surface of Mars. We called that mission the Mars Pathfinder mission, not because we didn't know how to get to Mars. We'd been there with Viking. But we were looking for a new way of doing business to get to Mars at greatly reduced cost. It had been, we knew, billions of dollars to get to Mars with Viking. We wanted to get there in hundreds of millions, if we could. And in fact, it worked. We spent $350 million on the Mars Pathfinder rover. That buoyed up our enthusiasm to go back again and again and again. You can only go back about every 2 years, 26 months, because of the orbits of Earth and Mars. But we said we'd go back again and again and again. We were looking for how inexpensively we could do it, and we had some failures. You'll notice there's more than 26 months between 97 and 04. We'd have some failures, and we learned from them. And in 2004, we would put twin rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, about the size of a coffee table, on the surface of Mars. They were important because they told us that liquid water had been on the surface of Mars. And we know from here on Earth that where there's liquid water, or where there is intermittently liquid water, we can find life. And where there's never liquid water, we do not find life. So was Mars habitable? Could it have supported life? Was it ever alive? How long was the water there? In fact, they couldn't tell us some very important features about that water on the surface. Was it salty? Was it sweet, acidic, or basic? Had it been there for eons or just for tens of years? So in comes Curiosity, 900 kilograms. That's big in rover speak, packed to the gills with all the science instruments necessary to answer that question about the ancient habitability of the wet Mars. In fact, there are 175 kilos of science instruments packed into that 900 kilos, a whole Spirit or Opportunity rover worth of science instruments riding along inside the Curiosity rover. But because she's so big, she's hard to land. Now, if you want to land on the surface of Mars, if you want to make it to the surface of Mars, and you're taking anything bigger than a bread box or smaller than a house, you have to do 4 things. On powers of 10 and in miles per hour, you hit the atmosphere going about 10,000 miles an hour. On landing night for Curiosity, we hit the atmosphere going 13,320 some odd miles an hour. That's fast enough that the energy of motion, the kinetic energy, can melt or vaporize the entire spacecraft. That's considered poor form. So we wrap the spacecraft in a special shell that we call an aeroshell, not very imaginative, and coat it with a material that will smolder and not burn. And by doing so, we shed all of that kinetic energy to the atmosphere of Mars, literally burning a hole in the sky on Mars. That process slows us down to about 1,000 miles an hour. Still not quick enough to land or slow enough to land on the surface of Mars, so we opened up a parachute. In our case, the world's largest supersonic parachute. Full open, a little bit bigger than about 1.5 times the width of this room. Opened up just under Mach 2, twice the speed of sound at Mars. Gives us a neck-snapping 12 Gs of deceleration. Slows us down to, well, powers of 10, 100, but really about 180 miles an hour is what we were going. When it sort of is done, the parachute slowed us down as much as we can, and so we need to let go of it and go on to rockets. Now, everything that's gone to the surface of Mars, Viking, Pathfinder, MER, they all used these techniques. But depending on how sophisticated your rockets are, whether they're throttleable or not, how good your instruments are to look at the ground, do they see range, do they see velocity also with respect to the ground, you have some error velocity, some residual little bit of energy to take up with this last touchdown system. The last thing that absorbs the gentle kiss and embrace with the Martian surface. It can be 10 miles an hour. For us, landing the big Curiosity rover, we were going 0.75 meters a second. Put it in maybe SI for you guys. That's a brisk Manhattan walk. That's nothing. In terms of kinetic energy, there's less than 1/3 of 1% of the arrival kinetic energy is present by the time we're down here. And yet the engineering of that touchdown system gave us, some of us, our greatest challenges. We were going to have to innovate from the top to the bottom. And we're not going to go to just any place on the surface of Mars. NASA wanted to go here. This is the Gale crater. It sits on the equator. It's a massive crater. You can really see it on the surface of Mars. Any decent image will show it. It's 90 miles across. You can see the rim of the, oh yes I do, look at that. The rim of the crater here, and rising out of the center of the floor of the crater is this massive mountain, Mount Sharp, 15,000 feet tall. That's higher than anything in the lower 48 in the continental U.S., higher than anything in the Rockies or the Sierras. And NASA wanted us to land that rover right down here between the proverbial rock and the hard place, between the crater rim and the foothills of Mount Sharp. To get a better understanding of that, this is another image of the Gale crater. This is shaded relief. Orange is high, blue is low. You can see the crater rim in the outside of the image and Mount Sharp rising up above the center. And I've overlaid all the uncertainty ellipses, the 99th percent miss distances of all of the missions to the surface of Mars, successful missions to the surface of Mars. They happen to be U.S. missions. But Viking in '76, Pathfinder, Spirit and Opportunity, in between Spirit and Opportunity rover and Curiosity rover, there was in 2008, we put another legged lander version of the Vikings down called Phoenix. And you can see that every additional expedition gets a little bit better. We get better at finding Mars. Interestingly, this dimension is our ability to find Mars and know exactly where it is. It's mostly driven by interplanetary navigation. This dimension is dominated by understanding the atmosphere and the aerodynamics of the vehicle going into the atmosphere. So we've gotten better on both accounts, but we're going to have to get a quantum better to get onto the flat blue landing spot between the rock and the hard place here. And of course, we weren't going to be landing just any old rover. We were going to be landing a rover bigger than other rovers, bigger than human scale things. Here it is sitting beside a Mini Cooper. If it were standing here today, I couldn't reach the top of its mast with my hand extended. She's intimidating. In fact, I was involved. I was in charge of the development of her before I went on to developing the landing system. And, you know, it's easy as an engineer to go through the math, do the math. Oh, it's going to be like this size, that's good. I'm going to like that. 2 meters, okay, 2 meters. And keep moving like this. And I can remember the first day I went down into our SAF, Spacecraft Assembly Facility, which is the huge high bay clean room that we use to assemble these. And we had the aeroshell in there and some pieces of hardware. And I walked in and I looked at this aeroshell and I said, my God, what have I done? You know, it was big enough that you could really sit and have a tea party inside of it. Not like this, but like this. So difficult to land. In fact, we tried everything to figure out a way of how to land her. We started with airbags, which we'd used for the Mars Pathfinder and Spirit and Opportunity. Unfortunately, at 900 kilos, there are no fibers known to humankind. Polyamides, PBOs, that will get us the kind of strength we would need to make a fabric, to make bags that would survive the impact. So that was out. We thought about going back to like a Viking approach. We use a legged lander, just put the vehicle on top of the legged lander. Now, I mentioned we'd had some failures between the first rovers and the second rovers, between 97 and 04, and one of those failures was a legged lander, the Mars Polar Lander. And as we went back through the failure analysis, which is a fantastic opportunity to learn, a painful but really unequaled opportunity to learn. It strikes down confirmation biases and normalization of deviance and all sorts of psychological features when you actually fail. We reminded ourselves about how tippy and unstable a legged lander is in the presence of uncertain terrain. You put a 900-kilo rover on top of it, it gets tippier still. So that was out from a stability perspective. We tried to fix the stability problem by making something we called the pallet. We added legs to it. We spread the legs out and let the thing do a belly flop. We cushioned the rover on with shock absorbers between the lander and the rover. Now, the problem was Our propulsion system sits in the belly of the beast, and our propulsion fuel is annoyingly toxic and also quite explosive. And exploding on touchdown, also considered super poor form. So we armored the bottom of the lander to protect against rock strike, and by the time we were done with that, it was basically too heavy to launch. So that was out. And in the fall, Indian summer, where we are, it's very hot, of 2003, we got everybody together that we had ever worked on a Mars mission that was still currently around, and that ran down to elder statesmen and gray-haired generals who had been on Viking, all the way through young whippersnappers who didn't know squat about squat. We put them in a room, and we spent 2 days, not a very well air-conditioned room. Room 201 of Building 158 at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I learned my first lesson in important culture, organizational culture in that room over those 2 days. Because the interaction, the brainstorming that we went through had a quality to it that I hadn't noticed before. The culture of the lab, actually, by my dumb luck, already had in it a feature that it separated people from the ideas that the people hold. So the wizened-haired general of Viking, whatever he said doesn't automatically run over whatever the young, wet-behind-the-ears whippersnapper said. And conversely, what the whippersnapper said was not valued just because it was from some kid who just got out of school. It was that the debate was allowed to happen with the ideas by themselves, not with their patron sheltering them from blows within the debate. We had a very fertile couple of days, and when we emerged, we had this. We called it direct placement, but very quickly it got the term the sky crane. We knew two things when we emerged from that room. One, that clear engineering principles had led us to that solution. And two, that every time we spoke of it, our credibility would leach away from us. Because people would look at it, and the very first thing that they would say is, that's crazy. In fact, I was the guy doing a lot of the speaking, and I developed this statement to make before I'd ever start talking about the sky crane. Great works and great folly may be indistinguishable at the outset. I love statements like this because they are both true and meaningless at the same time. The truth of it is that, sure, if something is really, really different, it'll seem so unusual that it will, your basis of judgment will be, upended, and it will appear crazy. The meaninglessness is, of course, crazy also looks crazy. So how do you distinguish between the two? It's true. In fact, this is actually a magical statement, because I promise you, if you say this to a room full of people with some conviction behind it, then afterwards, no matter what comes out of your mouth, they're like, oh, that might be a great work. In fact, the team itself had to labor under this truth. We did not have a test to put our landing system through that was conclusive. We live on the third rock from the sun, not the fourth. We have a different surface gravity, a different atmospheric makeup, different speed of sound. There are so many differences that we cannot put together a test here on Earth that has meaning for our landing system on Mars. And so we're left with the process of analysis. Pen and paper, computer simulation. This is one of millions of computer simulations that we've done. Problem with using things like computer simulations to validate your design is that simulation does not protect you against sins of omission. The eye forgots. If I dutifully create a universe in ones and zeros inside the computer that omits an important law of physics, I don't know, second law of thermodynamics, something. And that law is important. The computer won't tell me that I made that error. It'll just dutifully turn the crank on whatever that weird universe I created inside the machine with ones and zeros and tell me what the answer is for that universe, not for the one that we really live in. So when it really came down to it, the team had to collect together on the 5th of August of 2012 and collectively hold our breaths and wonder and hope that what we were engaged in was, in fact, a great work and not a great folly. So that was a good night. Infinitely preferable to the alternative that could have avoided us. Things had gone a little different. Now I know for myself, and I know for a lot of the folks on our team, that the numbers that come down and tell you that the rover's done its job, they all take the front of my brain. They take concentration. They don't have the visceral connection to our effort that these do. These are the very first images of a new place in our solar system, brought to you, to all of us, by the, frankly, blood, sweat, and tears of over 3,170 some odd women and men spanning 37 states in the U.S., 7 countries. They are, from the right to the left, the very first image of Mount Sharp seen from the surface of Mars. This is taken from the front of the rover the day after landing. We've removed the clear dust covers that would have impaired the image, and you can see a beautiful image of Mount Sharp, the rover's shadow there, and a lovely set of black sand dunes that separate us from our goal. In the center here, first color image of the surface of Mars. This taken by the MOLLE instrument on our robotic arm. So we have a camera on the robotic arm. It has a clear dust cover, clear plastic dust cover. And it has been dusted by the iron oxide-rich dust that gives Mars its red appearance, and given this particular image an extra ghostly red hue. And then, last but not least, on the far left, my favorite image of the surface of Mars, the very first image from the surface of Gale Crater. This is from the rear hazard cameras. This is fisheye lenses. These cameras are down on the bottom back of the rover to protect us against bumping into rocks when we're driving. We have not removed the dust cover, because at this point, this is just after landing. In fact, we had 2 science orbiters in orbit, they're still in orbit, around Mars. And they were the link, the communication link, between the spacecraft, as it was autonomously flying through the atmosphere, and us back at Mission Control. And all of our reactions in Mission Control were regarding telemetry that came back through those links. We were just about to lose the very last of those communication links. And we thought we might have time for just one image. We might have enough bandwidth for just one image. And this is the image we chose. We chose the rear because we were hoping, just on a lark, that we might see that. Now, I know you're as impressed about that as I am. That odd smudge is actually the plume of the descent stage, the jet backpack that had lowered us to the surface, cut itself free, and flown off to the aft of the rover, a safe distance to impact the surface. That is actually the impact plume of the descent stage. So it was a great night. We got things that we hoped for, a safe landing, and things that we didn't really ever dream that we would get, an action shot of the landing process. On the numbers, it was a great night. The green, the red, and the black are variously where the rover landed, where the rover thought it would land, and where we thought it would land. And although those are separated by a couple hundred meters, that's, well, it's not good if you're playing golf. But actually, if your golf shot's 352 million miles, that's actually pretty good. It's actually smoking good. So it was a fantastic thing. And I've been thinking afterwards, how come it went so well? And of course, the obvious is this: an incredible team of individuals, all bright and capable by themselves, and also uniquely capable of collaboration together. In fact, as time went on, my good friend and my deputy and I recognized the importance of this collaborative connection, of this interpersonal capacity to work together. And we came across a story from the early days of nuclear physics. Enrico Fermi, one of the fathers of nuclear physics, was about to perform the first controlled nuclear fission reaction. This was at University of Chicago, underneath the squash courts, in some homemade fission reactor. I don't ever want to be anywhere close to a homemade fission reactor. And as the story goes, they're about to perform this sustained fission reaction. They're going to pull out some control rods. And there's a technician. He's got 3 rods to pull out. He pulls out the first, starts to pull out the second. And Fermi looks at his pocket watch. Stop, he says. It's lunchtime. Put the rods back in and sit down to have a civilized moment of fellowship, to connect with one another, to understand each other as humans, to talk about family, work, whatever. And then after civilized lunch, you would go and revolutionize our understanding of the universe forever. We so liked that appreciation of collaboration and one another that we put on everybody's calendar, our electronic calendars that we use at the time, which were Meeting Maker, I think is what we were using, a meeting, lunch with Enrico. And it was to reserve that hour from 12 to 1, which frequently can get clobbered when things get tight because everybody knows that you got that lunch hour. But to reserve that for the team, to be together, frequently in ones and twos, but not uncommonly, en masse, down to the local French deli, Nicole's, for a couple of bottles of wine and a real enjoyable moment together. The strength of connection, understanding each other and trusting each other as humans, was very important in the job that we did. So these ideas, I want to talk about them a little bit some of these lessons explicitly. The first, this notion of separating the individual from the ideas the individual holds. Allowing the ideas to engage in free, mortal combat, where only the strongest ideas survive. Super key. But they can't engage in that combat if they're attached to a human being. That human being tends to shelter them. That human being has emotional IP in them. Right? I mean, like, I thought about this in the shower. That's the most brilliant thing I've ever thought of. There's actually some, I'll come back to that one. Remind me about that one. So when you do this, if you can do this, if you can separate this idea that I have an idea, I'm going to pull it out of myself, I'm going to put it into the big rock soup of debate, and I'm going to let it compete by itself. And the fact that it was my idea and I might be the chief engineer of the project, or it was my idea and I might be some wet behind the ears whippersnapper, doesn't matter. It's the idea. This idea of separating generates two pieces. It precipitates two things. One, it precipitates a culture of collaboration because you've made the connections, you are trusting each other as humans, and you're not basing it on the ideas that you bring in. And secondly, and importantly, it creates a culture of innovation. When those ideas really are free to combat one another, it puts you in a different mindset. You start to value and understand the value of the debate better. And the ideas that persevere through that combat are the most fit. Hold on to the doubt. This is something I noticed really when I was a younger person in school. When I was starting my education, restarting my education in my 20s, and facing college exams, I would find I had a common failure mode. I would look at the university exam, which for me would normally be like a small paragraph for a problem statement. John leaves Colorado Springs on a train moving 500 miles an hour heading due east, and so forth, right? And underneath that problem statement is a vast open space of white. And I would stare at that space of white with tremendous anxiety. In fact, it would, like panic would well up inside of me. Do I know how to answer this question? Is there an answer? Can I measure up to the big open white space? And in that state of anxiety, I would leap to put an answer down there. And not infrequently, it would be the wrong answer, an answer to an adjacent question. I actually hadn't sat there beside the question long enough to really know what I was being asked. I'd rushed it. Well, I learned to get past that. Actually, I learned to get past that by writing this on my cheat sheets. My compatriots would take a triple-aught repetograph and try and write all of the problems and the examples. We were each allowed a binder sheet of paper, and take it in. And I would write in some kind of crazy highlighter hippie crayon, hold on to the doubt across my blank piece of paper. Interestingly, later I found that this happened organizationally with groups of human beings in my professional life. Faced with a question that we didn't have an answer to, there was a collective anxiety. And we would fill that, or try to fill that, with an answer. Can't hold on to that open question. The problem is, frequently we wouldn't really listen to the question because of that anxiety. So hold on to the doubt is about staying open beside the question. It results in what I think is curiosity-based decision-making as opposed to fear-based decision-making. I'm not making a decision because I'm scared about the open blank piece of paper. I'm not making a decision because I'm so desperate to have a decision. I'm able to roll the question over in my mind. Now, this needs to be separated from the process of, with some title, say ingenuously, analysis paralysis. I'm not talking about waiting for the 99th percentile piece of data to come in that I'm absolutely certain I have the right solution. I'm not interested in that at all. In fact, I'm really not interested in questions for which there's a 99% answer. Those are pretty boring questions. I'm talking about staying present enough with the open question to really understand the profundity of it. Some practical tips for folks who might want to be leaders. You got to model. In general, for me, I found, whether you're raising children or leading rocket scientists, you have to own and model the behavior that you wish to teach. By example, that's the only way to do it, in my experience, and you can only do it. You can only do that if you really own it and believe it yourself. So, for instance, the separation between ideas and yourself, I do that all the time by being maybe a little Sybil-like, a little multiple personality disorder. I will say, wait a second, what the heck that's a bad idea. Let's talk about the ways in which that thing I just said we should do is wrong. And then when everyone gets a head of steam up about that, I'm like, whoa, 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 now let's talk about the ways in which the thing I just said is right. Keeping the team off balance as to, whoa, I can't tell what's the right. I'm going to have to use my sense of reason and my mind to figure out what's right. I'm not going to be able to attend what the human up in front of me is talking about. I used to ask of the team, later in our development, when the design, the architecture certainly had stabilized, we would still have changes that we wanted to make to how we were doing it. And I always wanted to welcome those changes. But later on, I was sort of starting to get my feet underneath me, maybe, about this kind of stuff. I'd ask team members to show up with the 3 central arguments for the change that they were proposing and the 3 central arguments against the change that they were proposing. And I would never criticize people about the idea or the arguments for, but I would beat the bejesus out of them if they didn't show up with well-forged arguments against their idea. I was trying to help us get some objective distance between ourselves and the idea that we had generated. I think it works. I know it works within my brain. This is a flavor of the hold on to the doubt, but it's sort of the hold on to the doubt in the reverse. Sometimes there were certainly for us several occasions where the team is working on something and you've discovered a problem. Something is not, you've discovered an error in your thinking or a flaw in the design, and you don't have a solution. We call that the dark room. It's the dark room because you're in the black. You don't know what the path out is, and it's very anxiety-provoking. Using that same kind of, I'm not going to panic, I'm not going to panic, I'm not going to panic, state of mind, you've got to be able to be present, and in the case when you're leading, lead a team, even though you may not know the path out of the dark room. The important thing to remember is that there will always be a path out until there isn't. When there isn't, you could consider that death. There's a great old adage, a coward dies 1,000 deaths. Don't sit there waiting, oh my God, is this death? Is this death? Is this the time I don't know how, I can't figure out a solution to this? Don't spend your emotions and your brain calories doing that. Relax. Allow yourself to not know that there's an answer. But remember that every previous time you've been in the dark room, there is an answer, and that you will eventually find it. And you do. That can be very helpful. I was raised, as we talked earlier, in Marin County in Northern California. So I was raised by hippies. We're actually kind of pseudo-Buddhist, post-beat, pre-hippies. So this is easy for me. I'm also told that I'm a selfish person. What do they know? And this also works for me. So a while ago, in the beginning of my work, I noticed that I spent a lot of time at work. In fact, if you guys calculate how many hours of your waking lives you spend at work, it can be a little depressing. And so I have a choice. I can look to find something to enjoy in everybody I work with and have enjoyment in those hours, in that 2/3 of my waking life that I spend at work sometimes. Or I can look for things to dislike in the people I work with and have a miserable time. I'm selfish. I choose the former. And I find that there is absolutely something to love in every single person. It's not actually very hard to find at all. And there's usually lots to love. You don't have to love everything. They can still bug the bejesus out of you with some of the stuff. And I found that when I connected with that other people notice. It feels good. They actually start to try it out on each other. This is wordless. I never said these words ever. In fact, it's only in retrospect that I recognize that this was going on. But I'm here to tell you that landing team, we had a humongous group love fest for 8 years of our lives while we were working on what many people consider the most difficult space system development of all time. And yet, we were having a blast. We were enjoying each other, and I believe that the product of our effort was better for it. Now, NASA is not all hugs and kisses and love. In fact, something like 30 days after landing, we took these images of the underside of the rover to make sure that we had not landed her on a rock. That would have been a bummer. I would have been in trouble. And then she took images of where she wanted to go. The foothills of Mount Sharp. Let me blow that up. There you go. That layered terrain you see there, that's laid down by water, the scientists believe. And in fact, they saw signatures of clay-like minerals from the orbiting instruments, and that's why we went there, to look at those clays, to see, because clays are formed in water, what the condition of that ancient waterborne, ancient aqueous environment of Mars was. In that image, this location would be due south. And that was our plan. What did the scientists decide to do upon landing? Go orthogonal, perpendicular to the plan. So it's worth noting and sharing. I think Eisenhower said it certainly famously with the planning is everything, the plan is nothing. Plan, our plan, the word plan, it's a model. It's a model of action, or just a model of the universe that we will see in future time. There are only a few things that we absolutely, or maybe only one thing, that we absolutely know about all plans. They are not the actual universe we will experience in future time. They may be a very close approximation, if we're lucky, or they may not be, but they aren't the real universe. And so an ability to let go of the plan in the presence of new information is an agile behavior of a team or an organization, and it's extremely powerful. For us, the fact that our plan was to drive due south, and the first thing we did was drive due east, made all the difference. We had a 2-year prime mission, and before we were 6 months into our mission, because we went to the east, in that place called Yellowknife Bay, we had taken a corer, or a drill, at the end of our arm, drilled a hole with a rotary percussive drill bit into the bedrock of Mars, brought up this interesting non-oxidized gray-like clay material, sorted it, and passed it to the science instruments inside the body of the beast, and given the scientists back here on Earth the data that let them answer the question that Curiosity had been sent to ask. The answer is yes. The ancient aqueous environment of Mars, the ancient wet Mars, had conditions that would have supported life. It was habitable. The water, you could have drunk it. It had the right salinity, the right pH, the right water activity, all to support life. Is Mars alive? Was it alive? These are questions that still hang in front of us. But we know that Mars would have supported life at a time when life was just starting here on Earth. 3.5 billion years ago, Mars was as wet as Earth was then, and in a condition that would have supported life at that time. So here she is. 900 kilos, 2,000 pounds of American ingenuity, according to the President's Science Advisor. She's sitting on Mars. Her name is Curiosity. She's executing our curiosity. But this image raises a question for me. Why do we do this? Why do we spend billions of dollars, $2.5 billion of U.S. taxpayer money? Well, why did I spend 8 years of my life, 9 years of my life, almost 10 years of my life designing a robot to go root around in the dirt of another planet? Is it a particularly practical enterprise to engage in? When I think about human activity and practicum, it's sometimes a little challenging. But I know some things are practical. This is practical. Not the selfie, but the 737-700 in the background. This is at Burbank Airport. And I can get on this airplane where you still use the air stairs, and I can take a selfie with my plane. And I'm going to take this plane to Houston Hobby Airport, which is outside the gates of the Johnson Space Center in Texas. The flight takes me 3 hours and 15 minutes. When my mother was my age, it probably would have taken 3 days. When her mother was my age, it would have taken 3 weeks. Air travel has absolutely revolutionized the way we think about our world, move goods and services, interact personally. I was in Los Angeles yesterday morning. But if you look at the early exploration of flight, such practical influence does not stand out as obvious. The early explorers of flight seem a little silly, perhaps. Driven, certainly. Early exploration was a bit injurious, sometimes embarrassing. I think actually downright humiliating upon occasion. And unfortunately, early explorers frequently paid with the greatest of prices. And yet, we kept at it. Despite it being impractical, we kept at it and eventually tamed the skies, even though for years air travel would be a risky proposition. So we don't explore because it's practical. We explore despite it being impractical. Most of the folks who get in boats and go over the horizon in the beginning don't come back, and they don't get anywhere. They feed the fish. Do we do it for the science reason, for the ultimate science question? This is Times Square in New York City on Monday, the 6th, at 1:30 in the morning. It was Sunday night in Pasadena, California, and it was Monday morning in Manhattan. I love Manhattan deeply. I was bicoastal for a little bit and had a place there. It's the city that never sleeps. But if it's ever going to take a little bit of a nap, 1:30 on a Monday morning is a great time for Manhattan to nap. And there we've got several thousand folks sitting in Times Square waiting to watch us land on the big jumbo screen. Now, are they there because they are just dying to know about the pH and salinity of the ancient aqueous environment on the surface of Mars? I don't think so. Or not only that, I think it's more akin to when thousands of people get together to watch if one athlete can cross a set distance at the same or faster than another athlete across that same distance. I think when we're exploring, we're asking questions about ourselves. I think as individuals, as teams, and as a people. We're kind of searching for the edge of what we can do. What can we do? Who are we? I think Neil Armstrong understood that with the words he would choose to say when he first stepped foot on the moon. One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. He was hinting that he was kind of carrying us with him, that his exploration was our exploration, as he became more, really, with that tiny footprint against the vast backdrop of space. We all became a little more. When we explore, we're asking really questions of humanity. Who are we? How grand are we? How great is our reach? What questions might we be able to ask and dare to answer? So I've been thinking about curiosity, exploration, groups of people. You know, us human beings are weird. We are very similar to ants in that everything we do together. Great ideas might come from an individual, but the realization of any idea comes through a collective work of people working together. And we're driven by this curiosity. In fact, it's in our genes. We are born through hips too narrow to pass a fully baked human brain. True. We come into this universe more naked and incapable than almost any other creature, certainly any of the primates. We come basically unprogrammed, save for perhaps one absolutely critical and important instruction. Be curious. I have a range of children, from 13 down to 1 month old. And as I watch them, I recognize that all of us, everybody sitting in this room, created, driven by their curiosity and their exploration and experimentation with dirt and rocks, they created you all created a model of the universe that was pretty darn accurate before you could almost walk. You understood the difference. Before you could speak, you understood the difference between a solid and a liquid. Boy, the mathematics of that's actually challenging to write down. You understood gravity, time. We created all of this by following our innate human curiosity. Each one of us, individually, with no one asking us to do that. In fact, there's good sociological and maybe anthropological arguments that one of the reasons we are such an awesome, perhaps terrifyingly awesomely successful species is specifically because we come in blank slate with the urge to learn the truth on the ground the moment we're born. So it's inside of us. If you keep it in you, alive in you as you get older, you stay agile and capable. You can be innovative as an individual. If you keep it alive in the culture, you can be innovative and competitive as a team. And if you have this curiosity alive in you and a culture of collaboration, there really is very little that a group of humans can't do. So, what's next for NASA? What's next on where will our curiosity next take us? The scientists tell us that to really answer these questions about Mars, to really unlock the mysteries of Mars, we have to bring a sample back from Mars. It's called Mars Sample Return. It takes 3 projects, the first of which we will launch in the year 2020 to take core samples and seal them. The next project comes and puts them in orbit. The next project takes them out of Mars orbit and brings them back to Earth. I'm the chief engineer of that first project. Mars isn't the only place to explore. Now, Europa, the ice moon of Jupiter, a thin ice crust, 1, 2, 10 kilometers, 40 kilometers, we actually don't know. But we do know that underneath that crust of ice, there's a liquid water ocean, a saltwater ocean, that has more than twice the volume of all the seas on Earth. And I'm an exobiologist, but I drink beer with exobiologists. They tell me that this is the #1 spot in the solar system the number one bet of where life might be existing today in the oceans of Europa. I'd like to put a lander on the surface and to see what signs of life have welled up from the waters beneath. So this image, it used to keep me up at night. Imagining sticking that little rover down between the rock and the hard place, 2:30 every morning, I'd wake up, churn my worries over in my brain. Now this image doesn't do that. My 1-month-old son, Ansel, does that. But this image still has tremendous meaning for me. It fills me with a sense of pride, but mostly actually makes me feel very humble. I thought of my job as a job, a frickin' awesome job, but a job. And when we got done and we landed, and I watched the reaction from people in the U.S. and around the globe, I recognized that what we were really doing was representing our humanity in this act of curiosity and exploration. And I feel tremendously lucky, and arguably undeservedly so, to have found myself at the pointy end of the spear to do such a thing. But this image also leaves me with a question. When I was younger, and I let my curiosity about the motion of the stars in the night sky disturb my status quo, some pretty awesome things happened. Our curiosity can take us to places we might never imagine it taking us. And I find that an excellent question to ask and sit beside unanswered is, where will my curiosity next take me? It's a profound question for me to think of, and it's arguably a profound one for you to entertain. Where will your curiosity next take you? Thank you very much for your attention.
So we're running a little bit out of time, but we have time for some questions. Any questions from the audience?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. But those are always illusory. Usually, my ideas, this is true for all of us, right? When we think of the idea, it is never better than in that shining moment of conception. Shing! And then from there, reality just drags it slowly down. That's okay.
Actually, I had a question.
Yes.
So I have the benefit of having read the book.
Yes.
And the book opens up with this wonderful story,
yeah.
a real grabber, which is you're 2 days out of Mars, you find a problem, what do you do? Okay. And in this case, most people, I think, decided or were advocating not making a change to some inertial measurement unit parameters.
Yep.
And yourself and I think one other person said, let's do it.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about?
Sure. We were 2 days out. IMUs, inertial measurement units, use gyros for rotational degrees of freedom and an accelerometer for translational degrees of freedom. And those are arranged however they need to be arranged inside the box that is the IMU. And then there are some numbers that tell you where those sensors are so that you can kinematically put those measurements together in a sensical way. And it's 3 numbers, and it's called the center of navigation. So where you would, so I now take this, and these measurements have meaning, kinematic meaning, for a particular location. And we had those numbers wrong. Humans make mistakes. We make everything that's great and all of the great mistakes. My friend, Miguel, had been bothered by this. It was a subtle difference. We saw it really notably when we were cruising out. And we use a spinner. We spin stabilize our spacecraft, so we get a centripetal acceleration out of that, and that was a little off. Different things, looking different things. Anyway, a couple days out, we find out what the thing is, which is we have the wrong numbers. So we do a whole bunch of analysis and simulation. Oh, does it really matter? And, you know, basically all the answers that we got back were, no, it does not appear to matter. Now, for me, I am always trying to keep track of what we might not be considering, the unknown unknowns. The known unknowns, that was that we had a failing in this, the known knowns cake, you know, the known unknowns, and then the unknown unknowns. And my concern was, frankly, two things. One, my good friend Miguel, very passionate man, he'd been, oh my God, we're going to die. Oh, no, 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 I think it's absolutely fine. I think it's absolutely fine. No, we're going to die, we're going to die. And he's the expert in this regard. And so when we all came together with the management team to make the decision, he happened to be on the top of his upswing. I think it's going to be fine. And I'm like, you know, dude, I remember what you were doing just 8 hours ago. So one, I'm going to filter that. I'm going to low-pass filter that signal. And then the second was, I do know that all of the work that we did to try and assess it was a extremely low-order approximation to the actual spacecraft. What do I mean by that? I don't know what your disciplines are, but for instance, it was a rigid body model of the spacecraft is what we exercised. And the spacecraft's actually not. It's an elastic, flexible thing, and there are modes going off there. And those modes represent very small motions that can have rotations and translations with them that we are not analyzing when we're asking the question, is it significant? And which could, in my mind's eye, integrate up to a deviation within our navigation filter and an error in our estimate of where we were, what speed we were going, et cetera, et cetera. So I just felt, I felt that there were less unknowns in exercising the process that we had to change the parameter than there were in not changing the parameter. And so that was my call. Actually, it's really my project manager's call, which is he just sits above me. And I sweated bullets that he was going to override me because it was a very inconvenient call. And actually, if it hadn't been for his deputy, who he really, really relied on, siding with me, it may have gone differently, but it did. Yes. 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 It was taken with the camera on the end of the arm. But just like a selfie stick doesn't show up, or if you choose how to hold a camera, it doesn't show up, actually those images are taken by hundreds of images piled together. So we have the choice of choosing those so that you see hundreds of little splinters of the arm just all over the fanning out, which doesn't look sensical, or choosing the part of the image that doesn't have the arm in it and then stitching those all together. That's why we never see the arm in the picture. Yes. Yes. There's a lag, 15 minutes-ish. Or 7 minutes, actually. No, 13.8 minutes. Yes, there is. But just like watching a good soccer match or hockey, that all of our sports events are actually delayed, or at least they are in the States, because people can say stuff or whatever. So they always have a little tiny chunk of delay in there. And I never feel like, oh, that touchdown really happened 15 seconds ago, so I don't care about that. Same thing here. I mean, it's true. Intellectually, as we got close to landing night, I rolled that around in my head. But then there's a stream of information coming. And it's true. The rover is alive or dead on the surface of Mars, and it's all happened already. But I'm learning and experiencing it in my, who is that? It would be, what's his face? Hawkins. In my light cone, this stuff is coming in fresh. Yes. It's fully autonomous, and we're just getting information back. Yes.
Thank you. Back in the days when I was in university, we studied a crisis management class, and we studied Challenger in '86 when we launched Challenger. And I remember the error that why Challenger exploded was apparently because there was a washer that couldn't withstand heat or something like that.
Yes.
Okay. And And there was a guy, part of the project, who had raised a hand and said, guys, we're 2 days. Several guys.
9.
Okay, thank you. And but nobody would listen to them, and we studied that from a crisis management perspective. And basically, the moral was to say, no, we're too close to launch. There's too many millions of dollars, millions of people. We have to launch. I mean, we're too much the hand into the grinder. Did you? Because Nick said 2 days before the launch, you figured a problem. Was that something that you think about, or you would have allowed yourself to say, no, we're not launching, even though all eyes on time on us?
Yeah, good, great question. No, the problem that we had was not, we didn't have an option not to launch. We had launched. We were on the way to Mars. We were 2 days out from running into Mars. So we had no choice that we're going to do a thing, either inaction or action, and 2 days later we will reap the fruits of that action or inaction. So there was not a chance for us to change. But the psychology to which that your crisis lesson was scratching at is delightfully rich. That psychology of decision making with imperfect information. In the case of the Challenger thing, it's a little easier because the information was pretty damn good. It was pretty clear, of those 9 individuals, that they really had good reason, and that it was actually mostly a failing in the management structure and the culture within it. But I can tell you, I'm facing, and as I mentioned to Nick, I will be having a review about our parachute system in 24 hours, and thank you, air travel. And it will be one where there's diversity within the team about what the right things to do are. And it's imperfect, incomplete data set, and how do you paint in the missing pieces of data. And, you know, an alternative, the most secure alternative, the analysis paralysis alternative, is simply to wait for more data. But you can also schedule out when that data will come, and some of it, the results of that frequently are just stay home, because you're never going to do, you know, you have to break some eggs to make an omelet. You have to take some risks to go over the next horizon. And so when we're facing, when a group, when individuals, each of us, when we face that which we do not know, we delightfully bring more of ourselves, our emotional predispositions, everything, into that, in facing into the black unknown than we do if I ask you what the first 5 digits of pi are. You don't connect up with your emotions very much. You just go back to some place in memory and you recall something. But when you stare at the, oh my God, we don't know what this is black and we don't understand it, what do you think of it? It's a little bit of a Rorschach test, right? And so it means that the debates amongst a team of diverse opinions are remarkably passionate and really hard to navigate without people personalizing, you know, that separation thing. You know, anyway, it's very interesting. It's the, anyway, okay. Nick, is that it? Do we got time for one more?
It's interesting that you talked about the parachute. My curiosity got just snagged on. I have a little bit of experience with subsonic parachutes.
Yeah.
But how do you open? Use a ballistic spreader, or how do you open that parachute at that speed?
So we do a mortar deployment, and it just inflates naturally. We put it far enough behind the wake of this vehicle. We've got 4.5 meters, like here or something, from here to the wall, diameter heat shield. So we put it 10 diameters behind, 10 of those diameters behind to try and recover good flow. And we allow this canopy, and this canopy was designed to do that kind of opening by itself back in the 60s. But we, for instance, we use it supersonically, and we do not test the individual ones supersonically. We use a similarity argument between subsonic inflations and supersonic inflations, which we have reason to impeach some of the fundamental assumptions based on that with some recent data. So anyway, we can talk about it at a later time. It's not a short thing.
I do have one last question.
Yes.
Because I think it's an important one. So there's another part in the book where you talk about making people, turning everyone into a system engineer.
Yes.
Which is basically teaching them the optimization of the whole versus individual pieces. And I think that's a big lesson in any large collaborative team.
Yes. In fact, to bring it back home to this question of the parachute, which is alive in my head right now, the parachute team would like to do a supersonic test, because they will certainly sleep better at night if they do that supersonic test. It's $20 million, maybe 30. That is dollars, which I blithely don't care about. But I do care about the distraction. That number of dollars can be turned into a commodity that I do care about, which is engineering brain calories. $20 or $30 million of engineering brain calories spent on that is $20 or $30 million of engineering brain calories that I could direct at other risks that I perceive of across the project. I have to be careful in my debate tomorrow not to personalize what I can feel almost anger at in moments at the selfishness, the non-system engineering of these folks who are building the parachute, because they're not really appreciating what's outside of their boundary. So when I was starting to lead, I was leading a team of mechanical engineers on the Spirit and Opportunity landers, the little twins, little-ish twins, 175-kilo twins. I started with this idea. I want you guys to be system engineers. And what systems engineers for me means is people who come out of their silo, look across the boundaries, appreciate the balance that's taking place at a system level. They don't have to, I mean, if their job is mechanical, they don't have to go and spend all their time doing electrical engineering. But I want them to appreciate and understand the balance across the project. I also want them to feel licensed to come out of their thing and ask questions about the other stuff, because sometimes the questions we ask with beginners' eyes are the best. They notice or observe an obvious problem that is so obvious it's not absorbed by the specialist in the particular thing. So, for instance, the prop guy could ask a question of the person doing the bridle that lowered the two vehicles, to separate the two vehicles. And that question could make a better bridle, even though it came from a guy who's pouring rubber solid rocket propellant into cans. So this idea of moving across boundaries, appreciating the fact that it's actually a gesture of collaboration also, right? It's understanding that we're all working to a common goal, that it's not just my goal to do my thing and double check and get a gold star and worry about and push risk into somebody else's bin. You know, I will not say this tomorrow. Remind me not to say this tomorrow. We don't get points if the whole thing doesn't work. The lab does not get credit if the whole thing doesn't work. And Division 35, or the Mechanical Engineering Division, doesn't get credit, therefore. And therefore, Section 352 does not get credit. And therefore, the spacecraft structures group, which is the piece of people which own that parachute, don't get credit. So please, I won't be saying this tomorrow, but you know, think about the bigger picture. I need you to participate in the debate in both your own specialist hat and in a system engineering hat.
Now that you got it out today, for sure you won't say it tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.